Recently, the OpenAI team released their newest model, the GPT-4.5, and this model has been causing a lot of controversy online. And there's a simple reason why. Well, the model is just simply too expensive to run. So given its extremely high costs, is GPT 4.5 even worth using? Well, that's exactly the question that I'm going to try to answer today, and essentially try to come up with a framework where we can justify the costs of GPT 4.5, or at least to justify the costs of a more expensive model. But I'll preface this by saying this was really hard to come up with because this is just incredibly expensive. So if you're new to the channel, my name is Matt Paiva. I build AI solutions for businesses, especially on the sales and marketing side of things. And in the last video, I actually was reviewing the performance of GPT 4.5 in comparison to different models that OpenAI has, just to see if there was actually a performance improvement. And long story short, yes, there was. There was a good performance improvement in three main business categories: in customer service, in coaching and feedback, and in content creation. But it just turns out that the cost of this model is just way too high. So let's take a look at the computer to actually see the price comparison between these models. And as you guys can see over here, the price for GPT 4.5 for 1 million tokens is $75, and the output is $150 per 1 million tokens, which is actually insane, because if we compare this to GPT-4.0 mini, which is the model that I usually use for a lot of the use cases that I built, this model only costs 15 cents for 1 million tokens for input and only 6 cents for 1 million tokens for output. And this price comparison, or this price difference between 4.0 mini and 4.5 is literally 500 times more expensive to run 4.5 to run an input on 4.5. So this is actually insane. Now, we might be wondering, like, GPT-4.0 mini is actually one of the most efficient models and one of the cheapest models that OpenAI has available. Well, if you look at 4.0 by itself, it still costs $250 in comparison to the $75. And in the output, it costs $10 in comparison to $150. Like, the price comparison is still crazy. And even if we go to the O1 models and the O3 mini models, which are models that are really good at reasoning, we can see that the price comparison is actually insane. Like, I'm laughing while I'm saying this because it almost doesn't make sense to have the O1 model, which is an insane model for reasoning, costing $15 per 1 million tokens and $60 per 1 million tokens of output. Meanwhile, having GPT 4.5 costs $75 for 1 million tokens of input and $150 for 1 million tokens of output. Even when we look at Reddit to see what people are talking about the GPT 4.5 API pricing, we see comments like this one of this guy that said, "This is the kind of pricing you'd offer for something you didn't really want people using." And there was even some other person that included this graph over here of the comparison of pricing for the API costs for all GPT models. And we can see that, like, the comparison, like the gap between GPT 4.5 and every other model is just so big that is actually really hard to justify the costs. But in my experience, the model is still good. It still showed some decent improvement from GPT 4.0, or at least that's what I took away when I compared the two models in the previous video, especially when it came to customer service and when it came to content creation. I left really broad prompts, so obviously there are a lot of prompt engineering things that we can do to make the output of GPT 4.0 be a lot better than GPT 4.5. But with that being said, I did like a lot of the improvements that came for GPT 4.5, especially making it sound a lot more human. Now, how do we actually justify the cost of this model? Well, if you are using ChatGPT Plus or ChatGPT Pro, you don't have to worry about this. You can still use GPT 4.5. You're going to get probably a limit on either or, like Pro really likely to be a lower limit, and Plus, you can have like a higher limit on how many prompts you can run with GPT 4.5. So if you are using it as a casual user, I would generally recommend just using it in the ChatGPT interface. But if you still want to take advantage of building AI systems around this model, this is how I would go about it. So before we go over the types of automations that I would consider using GPT 4.5 for, why don't we go over the 4 main types of automations in a business? Well, as you can see on this quadrant, we have automations that can either have high or low impact or high or low volume. On the first quadrant, we have low volume, high impact. On the second quadrant, we have high volume, high impact. On the third quadrant, we have low volume, low impact. And on the fourth quadrant, we have high volume, low impact. Obviously, whenever we're building AI systems for businesses, we want to stay on the top part of the quadrants where the high impact automations are. In some instances, we want to look at the bottom part just to automate some simple tasks that happen way too often. But for the case of GPT 4.5, I think that the best scenario here, or the best quadrant here, is the low volume, high impact. And we are looking at low volume, high impact scenarios because these scenarios don't happen often. Low volume, these are uncommon or rare, and high impact, meaning that it directly affects the revenue generation or the profit margins of the business, or even the entire customer experience for a specific customer. So a really good example that we could use over here would be either when an enterprise lead comes in through your CRM software, because that lead has a really high spending potential, and we could use GPT 4.5 for that type of use case. It might be the case that you usually deal with companies that are medium sized, but nothing really enterprise level, so that would be a rare occasion. Another occasion would be someone asking for a refund for your most expensive product. So let's say that your most expensive product costs $10,000 and customers rarely ask for refunds on that product, but once in a while, like once every month or so, a customer asks for a refund on that product. You could also use GPT 4.5 to draft a response that is empathetic, that sounds good for the customer to hear, so you don't fully break that relationship and even avoid the refund at the end of the day. So in a nutshell, we're looking at high stakes scenarios. These are scenarios that are directly attached to the survival of the business that don't happen that often. And we want this to be scenarios that don't happen that often, especially because if it did happen very often, our token usage would go through the roof and our price would skyrocket, or the price that we're paying for GPT 4.5 would skyrocket. So for scenarios like high volume, high impact scenarios, that would be a different type of approach, because we know that we're going to be spending a lot on token usage for that scenario. And we also know that GPT 4.5 is going to take a lot out of our pockets for these high volume scenarios. So here are 5 examples of high impact, low volume scenarios that I asked ChatGPT to come up with. And actually these are exactly what I'm talking about. Like I said before, high stake refund requests. These are requests for refunds for like your most expensive product. Executive level outreach. These could be outreaches that you're sending to a specific type of customer. So these could be CEOs or senior executives, and you could take a lot of advantage of using GPT 4.5 to craft better communication. Crisis management communications, and these could be automated alerts that escalate unusual customer complaints, or this could even be a system where you set up an RSS feed that reads the news. So whenever your company pops up on the news with a negative connotation, you can set this up, because you know negative PR is never good for business. Number 4 would be customize high value proposals, and these would be similar to number 2, but instead of outbound, it would be inbound. So this would be for businesses that can have a high spending potential with your business that are coming in. So you can draft a proposal using GPT 4.5. And number 5 could be VIP, customer escalation handling. And this could be, for example, someone that is chatting with your customer support chatbot on your website, and you know that that customer is one of your top 5% of customers. They are customers that spend a lot with your business, and they're really important for your business. If there is a way for you to identify that, it would make sense to transfer the conversation to GPT 4.5 versus GPT 4.0, for example. So there are a lot of different ways of determining if a workflow is a high impact workflow. The way I think about it is both in terms of quantitative and qualitative aspects. In terms of quantitative aspects, I think about the potential revenue generation or the potential cost saving of a specific workflow. So if it's a specific workflow that could generate a lot of money by running once or however many times, that could be a high impact workflow. If it's a workflow that just saves so many hours for the team, that could also be a high stake workflow. And on the qualitative side, we could have a workflow, for example, that generates a report that helps managers make better decisions. And that could be a high stake workflow from a qualitative point of view. So with that in mind, try to think about a workflow in your business that is super high stakes. Thought about that? Now think about a workflow that is super high stakes and also high volume, something that happens all the time. Because even though I said that ideally we would use GPT 4.5 for low volume, high stakes types of scenarios, we can also use GPT 4.5 for high volume, high stakes scenarios. But we would need to use a really good categorization tool before, or at least that's how I see it. Now, what am I actually talking about? Let's break this down. So the way a categorization workflow works is that we first have input coming in from some type of module. In this example, example that I'm sharing with you guys over here, it's coming in from emails. And then we have a first routing step, or essentially a categorization step that happens right off the bat. So essentially what's going on over here is that we're reading all emails coming in and we're categorizing the types of emails coming in. From there, depending on the category that comes up, we could use GPT 4.5 if the email asks for it. So if we're receiving an email that is just an FAQ email, it might not be necessary to use GPT 4.5 because the GPT 3.5 could have all the answers that we need to answer these FAQs. That connected to a good knowledge base, of course. But if our first categorization tool says that the email coming in is actually a customer complaint, we could use GPT 4.5 to draft out an apology email that fixes the situation for the customer. Now, in this scenario, we're using a high volume scenario where we're receiving hundreds of emails every day, categorizing it in a specific type of format to find out the high stakes scenario from within the high volume scenario. So using that same example, answering FAQ questions is a very low stakes thing that a simpler model could do with access to a good knowledge base. But answering to a customer complaint or a refund request would be a more high stakes scenario. And honestly, a lot of these high stakes scenarios are actually low volume as well, because how often are you actually receiving refund requests? Well, hopefully not that often, because that wouldn't be a really good sign. But a lot of the times your customer service email could be receiving 100 messages every day. And out of those 100, you have one customer complaint or one refund request, or even maybe one customer complaint every week. But you don't want to miss that email and you don't want to escalate to someone that's going to take too long to respond. You want to use AI to your advantage to come up with empathetic responses that actually solve the problem that your customer is facing. But before you go ahead and start swapping all of your GPT models and copying and pasting these prompts from GPT 4.0 to GPT 4.5, try to create a pilot test first. Come up with a little database where you can track the results and track token usage so you can test this out for a little bit of a period of time, maybe a week, maybe a month, and see what the actual token usage is and see what the price increase is in comparison to the previous models. Now, to do this type of pilot, I would recommend you to store the two different types of output. Not only you want to store the token usage, but you want to store also the output coming in from GPT 4.5 and the same type of output coming in from GPT 4.0. So for example, you could do a customer service email reply for type 4 complaints that is both run on GPT 4.0 and then GPT 4.5. And then at the end, you can go and manually compare these things or come up with a clever system to compare these things to actually determine if the improvement that you were looking for GPT 4.5 is there, because if it's not there, there's no point in swapping. And obviously remember how much that improvement costs at the end of the day. So to recap the whole video, if you really want to use GPT 4.5, try to think about those high stakes scenarios and then try to find the instances where GPT 4.5 would make sense. Essentially try to find where there is a low volume of occurrences in a specific type of scenario. So once you have these scenarios in your mind, I recommend that you set up a pilot test. And this pilot test would ideally have three main elements. The first one is a database for you to store the comparison of outputs. Second one is actually the comparison of outputs between the GPT models that you're using. And this is not only the token usage, this is also the quality of the output that you are receiving. And number three, a little bit of time. Give it however much time you would need to actually get a good sample size to get a comparison over. And last but not least, once your pilot is over, go ahead and analyze that data and determine for yourself if it's useful to use GPT 4.5 or if OpenAI effed up over here pricing this model in this range. So you can let me know in the comments down below if you do run this test or if you want me to help you run these tests for you. Now, with all of that being said, if you still are curious on how GPT 4.5 performed in comparison to the other models, I'll leave the video right over here so you can go ahead and watch that. And if you need any help building AI solutions for your business the right way so you're not wasting money using these extremely expensive models, you can go down in the description below and book a call with me or get access to my free templates down below as well. Now, that's all I had for you for today, and I'll talk to you soon. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.